Test, test. Maybe just say to people to use. Well, that's 11:20. Ladies and gentlemen, can you take your seats, please? We're about to begin the next session. Okay, welcome back to Session 2, Action on Climate Change. My name's Stephen Ramage. I'm from the GEO Secretariat, and I'm here to support our distinguished guests here, who are going to inform us about activities on climate action. So our facilitator for this session is Patrick Child, who you've seen already, who's one of the co-chairs. Patrick is the Deputy Director General for the Directorate General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. In that role, he leads the policy for implementation, impact, and sustainable investment strategies. Over to you, Patrick.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Steve. And I'm very happy to be here and to be facilitating this really crucial discussion on the contribution that Earth observation can make to the global response to climate change. And I'm really happy to have with us to kick off this discussion two very, very distinguished and I think very relevant speakers. We firstly have Mr. Na Puna, Director of the National Environment Service of the Cook Islands, who's going to kick things off with a first keynote address. Mr. Puna has been in his current position as Director of the Cook Islands National Environment Service for 7 months. Before that, he was CEO for the Minister of Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Policy and a government consultant. But a large part of his career has also been as a senior maths teacher. And he told me that in that capacity, he developed a really impressive capacity for public speaking. So we're looking forward to seeing him demonstrate that particular dimension of his rich personality. And then our other speaker, who will round off the discussions at the end of our session, David Oman, who's a Program Officer for Digital Strategy and Innovation at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, representing, of course, one of our key participating organizations. Mr. Oman leads the work on digital strategies for climate change adaptation in the UNFCCC Secretariat, and therefore he's overseeing the substantive and technical development of new tools and services and advises colleagues on the search for digital solutions, in particular on climate resilience. And he's also, in that context, has a particular focus for fostering private sector engagement in climate resilience, which I think is vitally important. So we've distributed for this session a short discussion paper, which I hope provides a sort of framework for our debate. I think it's now widely accepted that Earth observation are not only relevant, but actually necessary for the effective assessment and monitoring of climate and the related socio-economic variables, and for the assessment and evaluation of different policy responses and actions, and in tracking the implementation of those actions and the responses and impacts that they can have. And I think that what we need to try and tease out in our discussions today is the crucial role that Earth observation can play in our global efforts to address climate change and in the implementation of the UN Convention Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the data and knowledge that we can derive from Earth observation can help countries respond in many areas, including in specific provisions and in their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. So, for example, Earth observation could contribute more accurate data on greenhouse gas concentrations and emissions for carbon accounting in relation to mitigation responses. And the UNFCCC has also highlighted the need to strengthen scientific knowledge on climate, including research, systematic observation of the climate system, and early warning systems, in ways that help us to inform climate services and support decision-making. Earth observation is also a very important component in the scientific work of the Ipcc. And I think that the recent special reports from the Ipcc that we've seen on land use and on oceans and the cryosphere demonstrate the very relevant contributions that Earth observation can contribute to the wider evidence base and scientific knowledge that is so vitally important to support often very challenging political decisions. We think that the Ipcc will also benefit from improved use of Earth observation to assess climate impacts and progress on adaptation. So I think that the document that you've got and the questions that are raised in it set the scene very well. But to sort of give life to our discussion, I'd like to start by now inviting Mr. Puna to give his keynote presentation and to share with us the perspectives that he brings from the Cook Islands. So, Mr. Puna, please.
Check. Kia ora ana tātou katotoa I roto I te ara. Before I start my keynote, it's traditional where I come from to connect with the traditional people of Australia. So bear with me. I've got a little chant. Tutua, tutua, tutua te rauanga kia kumuanga rere. Ki o mai ngāri ki e tini, ki roto I te kaukura. No te ina ngāro e, no te ina ngāro e. Kia orana. Kia orana in the Cook Islands is may you live on. And I think that's the only greeting in the world I think I can boast and say that's the only greeting in the world where people actually wish you well for the rest of your life. In New Zealand, we call them our younger brothers because they left, they came through the Cook Islands. They only say kia ora. And that means you can live for now. So, yeah. Anyways, Kia ora na tātou katoa. Greetings, and thank you for having me today. I was told at the beginning that I had to sit in front, but when I entered the room, I was just overwhelmed with all the technology, the things that I've seen outside here. I sat right at the back because I just felt so humbled just to be included into this meeting. I don't have membership because I'm self-governing Cook Islands, but we've got the New Zealand passport. So we're New Zealand citizens. So the arrangement is different, but it has been reached out, and I'm really grateful for this honor to be here. The Cook Islands, if you're Googling the Cook Islands right now, you would see that this is a tiny nation, small islands, but we've got a big-ass ocean. 240 square kilometers spread out in 15 little islands. So you're looking at an average of 15 square kilometer per island. But that's not how it works, because some islands are bigger than others. I have been in the role for 7 months, and when I started, from my background as a teacher, I couldn't believe the space that the environment was in. I've been given this, again, big-ass ocean, 2 million square kilometer of ocean to manage. And as a teacher, I always use data. So for those teachers amongst us, we've always used data from the years before, and and we sort of do a work plan to meet the needs of the individual students that we have. But in the environment space, there's nothing. There's nothing. And it puzzled me. So the work that I've been doing up to this stage is pulling together all the frameworks that will enable data collection, monitoring. And I'm so blessed to be amongst this organization because I want to be part of it. It just blew me away just watching the past pictures of Australia and how some parts have already lost 200 meters of beach. I was just blown away. 200-meter beach for us is a whole island in some places. And that's the sort of thing I want, because when I'm talking to my leaders, when I'm talking to the people in power, when I'm talking to a community to try and take us to a better space in the environmental world for the Cook Islands, because I wanted my environment policy to be future-proofed, climate-proofed, but the support is not there, because in the Cook Islands, we only have an oratory history. So things has been passed, so it depends who the speaker is. You might get a little bit of onion here, a little bit of herbs here, just to spice things up. But that's how things were relayed, and that's the reality for us. At this point in time, we have been talking about climate change for a long time. We have a climate change office. We've just gone to meetings around the world, but the reality for me, I've been given the environment, the National Environment Office, and I've got this, again, big-ass ocean, small islands. I think the word that I wanted to use for this is we have little margin of error. We can't afford to make any mistakes. I was just sharing with one of the professors that I ran into, the king tides. The king tides are we've never had king tides that common before. Yeah, we'll have the odd ones, but now it's like every other month. And for the mainland, Rarotonga, those people who have been to our capital, it's one of the better parts of the Cook Islands because it's part volcanic, part atoll. But the reality is, in the middle, we can't live there because there's mountains. So we're only living around the coast. So on the western side of our island, we've got king tides that goes over our roads. So, and we don't have any warning signs. We don't have any early detections, all of those things. So I'm actually just watching all the technology, the booths out there, just blew me away. I think my message today to the GEO is that you guys got all of these technologies. It's beautiful. I liked what South Africa said, that the co-chair. The idea here is we don't leave anyone behind. Yeah? So the anyone, I'm one of them. Because you guys are already here, but you haven't considered me yet. So I'm hoping, my presence here, I'm jealous of Tonga. Good on you, Tonga, for being the first to come on board. I applaud you, but I'm here for the Cook Islands, but I'm here for all the small island nations as well. Because I'll share something that's, I couldn't believe when I flew over Australia. Every time I kept looking down, Australia was still there. For 5 hours, Australia was still there. Massive land. But we don't have that luxury. When we're coming in to land, people that hasn't been to the Cook Islands, you can tell on their face, like, oh, is that big enough to land a big plane? Because it's so tiny. So for us, small island nations, for us, the Cook Islands, we can't afford to make any more mistakes. I was talking to a professor from MIT. This is what I said to her. We screw up now, we're screwed. Because we're taking rocks to mitigate the king tides and have to protect our roads, but then we've actually already removed small mountains, 2 mountains on Rarotonga. So that's how huge it is. To the people that's doing all of this work, it means nothing to them because they're getting the money, all of those things. They just remove these rocks, but they forget that we're only tiny. And the way I see EO or GEO is that you are the strategic level of the physicality in the environment space. What I mean by that is, this is where you see things from the outside. While I was doing that, I actually, it took me back to a song by Bette Midler, because it says, from a distance, the world looks blue and green, and the snow-capped mountains white. From a distance, the ocean meets the stream, and the eagles take to flight. So EO, for me, can give us that perspective from a distance. But although it's from a distance, it actually can take small island nations like us further, if you can feel that. My question I want to ask, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? That's the question I'm asking myself. That's the question I'm asking the room. What can you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I know when we talk about climate change, there's so many negative things about it. But I'm an optimist. I'm a realist. You know, I don't just sit there and cry and, yeah, that's why I'm here. I had a couple of other meetings that I had to go to Samoa. I sent other people to go there because this is really, really important to me because I can see how it can help the Cook Islands. But not only the Cook Islands, I want you guys to realize that there's hundreds and hundreds of tiny little islands, little dots, yeah? The song that Bette Midler wrote, she didn't mention about those little dots on the globe. And I really love the dots on here. I just said, this is me. I'm one of those dots. Yeah. And to end, I think I wanted to bring back what I said on Monday. I used Doctor Strange. This is a movie. And it had a quote in there that I really loved, and I think it's really appropriate. You cannot beat a river into submission. You have to surrender to its current and use its power as your own. So the Cook Islands, I'm not small, but the nation is tiny. Yeah, I know I'm big. I represent the ocean, the big ocean. But we're too tiny to actually build another river. And this river is right here. This is the new river. I want to use your current. I want to use your power and make it as my own. But you have to allow me to do that. That's all I'm asking. Please, consider the Cook Islands. Consider the small island nations with real issues when it comes to climate change. It's humbling to be here, and this will be life-changing for myself, and I've just shared with my co-speaker here, my 5 beautiful daughters, and for the next generation. I've always had the notion that we actually borrow of our children. We borrow the environment of our children. So when we give it back, it should be much, much better than what we have it now. And that's the message I want to leave with you guys. We're just borrowing our children, our great-grandchildren, generations to come. We're borrowing the environment. We're borrowing, and I want us to take care of it. The big brother notion comes to mind, because you guys are the big brothers. I'm the big man, but you guys are the big brothers, GEO, and I thank you for the opportunity. Kia ora ana, e ke manui.
Well, no, thank you very much for those inspiring and very colourful thoughts. And I think you've really set the scene for our discussion in a very lively but also sincere way. And I think that the issues that you raise and the examples that you share about the situation in the Cook Islands and in the Pacific Island communities, of course, are repeated in many other parts of the world where there are fragile island communities which are facing, if not the same challenges, but very similar challenges. And I think that if we can now open up a discussion with the floor. Now, I know that all of you in the GEO community have long experience of how to contribute to our discussions in a lively and interactive but well-disciplined way. So if I could just remind you that if you want to intervene, you put your nameplate vertically and someone will see it, even I think at the very back of the room. Or if you prefer, you can join the conversation through the Slido, which is on the screen, and we'll pick up your questions. Oh, you can't see that screen? Okay. Well, it says www.slido.com, code #GEO in capital letters, capital P, Plenary, with the rest in small letters, okay? And I'd like, I mean, as well as picking up Mr. Puna's very sort of direct, challenging question, what would you do if you cannot fail? We've got a number of other questions which are more sort of drilling down into what specifically GEO can do to help improve the use of Earth observation for monitoring and understanding climate change. How can we connect better as a community with the global debate on climate change, and in particular with institutions like the Ipcc and the UNFCCC? And how can we use our leverage and our support to help countries in the world and our member governments to raise the level of ambition in their responses to climate change? And how do we what conclusions do we draw from that in terms of the or consequences for the content of the GEO work program in promoting and supporting the use of Earth observation in monitoring climate impacts and evaluating and implementing mitigation and adaptation responses? And finally, how should we pick that up in our work in the program board, in the executive committee, and also with the support of the Secretariat? So those are some of the questions which I hope we'll be able to address in the next 45 minutes or so. And then at the end of our session, I'm going to ask David Oman to share with us the perspective of the UNFCCC and maybe be able also to respond to some of the points in the discussion. So with that, I'd like now to open the floor to contributions. As I say, please think about the questions that we put forward, think about the content of the discussion paper that we've circulated, and above all, feel free to respond to the really inspiring contribution that we've had from Mr. Puna. So please, the floor is open. So I see Australia. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask my colleague from the Department of Environment and Energy, Rob Sturgis, to intervene.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Chair. And thank you for the interventions so far. You certainly lay out the challenge for everybody on the floor, and I hope you get some positive responses to your questions. The issue that I would like to focus on is this question about the best approaches on the use and application of Earth observation data. And I'd like to make a few comments about Australia's experience in using Earth observation data in support of climate change action, and in particular, the role of Earth observation data in supporting the building of a robust monitoring system for Australia's greenhouse gas inventory system. So, under the Paris Agreement, Australia has a commitment to reduce emissions by 26% by 2030. And we recognised from the beginning the importance of establishing a strong and robust greenhouse gas inventory monitoring system in order to equip these climate change emission reduction commitments. Earth observation data has been critical to the development of our greenhouse gas inventory monitoring system. And Australia was one among the first countries to pioneer the use of Earth observation data for our national greenhouse gas inventory. One of our main innovations was in the use of Landsat data for carbon stock monitoring, and what a fantastic contribution that was made by the US government in making Landsat data freely available for the world to use. Very important in our situation. So we use the Landsat data to monitor changes in forest cover. So this is a critical input for our monitoring system. And then we link that Earth observation data with an advanced ecosystem model that we call FullCam. So this idea of linking the Earth observation data with important data sets and modelling to help draw out the implications of the Earth observation data, really important in our situation. Now, why did we go down this route? Well, in many countries, or in many OECD countries, there are advanced forest monitoring systems because forests are used for timber. And they have lots of data about their forests. In Australia, we don't have that. 90% of our forests are not used for timber. So we had a problem with data, which we solved with Earth observations. And our situation is very common around the world, especially in developing countries which are now taking on commitments to monitor their imagery systems. So we think that our experience is kind of living proof of the value of Earth observation data in the climate change context. We have a long association with GEO, starting from 2008 with the forerunner of the successful Global Forest Observations Initiative. And I note now that the GFOI, as we call it, has become a flagship of the GEO. The GFOI has already produced detailed methods, guidance, standards, if you like, to assist countries in developing their measuring and reporting capabilities, and in support of RED Plus in particular, but also in conjunction with the guidance prepared by the Ipcc. And we think this is a valuable product that GEO has supported. Regionally, there are initiatives that we are interested in. For example, forest monitoring through an Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit that we have helped to establish these last few years. And we are establishing an international partnership for blue carbon where Earth observation data can be important. So going forward, we recognise the value of the excellent work of the Space Agency and the leadership of GEO and CEOS in providing access to Earth observation data. We reiterate the importance of coordinated global collections of space data into the future. We note the importance of the flagship of GFOI. And finally, we look forward to the work of GEO and its partners in assisting the development of land sector management and reporting capabilities for more countries in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. No, some really powerful examples of successful bringing together of Earth observation and the debate on climate change in the Australian context. So the Netherlands, I see, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Netherlands government, I would like to inform the GEO community on the Global Commission on Adaptation. That's an initiative started by various institutes, by the UN, World Bank, but also supported by the Netherlands government. And the Global Commission on Adaptation is to share, in fact, knowledge and actionable knowledge related to climate change and adaptation. They are not partner or associated with the group on Earth observations yet, but since their mission, I think it would be valuable if GEO is associated with the Global Commission on Adaptation, and there will be a big event next year, a summit, high-level summit in the Netherlands in October, and from the Netherlands Space Office we are going to organize at least 1 or 2 side events together with maybe GeoGlam, but I would invite, in fact, GEO and maybe other member states to come to the Global Commission Adaptation Summit in October next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to China, please.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. As a previously key speaker mentioned, the Cook Island is a small country, but China is a larger country. But all over the world, we are living in one world. Each country is one family member. So related to the climate change, especially for the global warming, the CO2 emission is the main forcing. So in which the anthropogenic emission is a main target. So from this point of view, China currently is the biggest CO2 emitting country because we have a lot of population economic. At the same time, the Chinese government has made a great effort to support the NDC's national determined contribution and the global CO2 emission reduction. So the basic example of this is greenhouse gas satellite technique. Until now, we have Tensat. It's the first Chinese CO2 satellite. And we have the second one is Gaofen series, GF5, and meteorological satellite series. So until now, we have 3 satellites on orbit. So this makes China become the country with the last CO2 satellite. And after this meeting, we will launch in the high resolution Tensat data of CO2. That will make a contribution to the global CO2 observation. In the near future, we also planning to launch a new greenhouse satellite. The name is Atmospheric Environmental Monitoring Satellite, AEMS, planning to launch in 2021. And another one is a high precision greenhouse gas monitoring satellite. Will be launching 2023. Both these satellites can provide more information to that. We would like to cooperate with the different space agencies in order to reduce the uncertainty of the national emission inventory reporting. Our newest funding is that we use the Chinese in-situ measurement combined with the GOSAT, Japanese greenhouse gas satellite, and OCO2, American satellite. So we found the China ecosystem provide an expect large ecosystem absorption. So this provides a very good example how to use the space technique to make the measurements. And yes, moreover, I emphasize here that international cooperation, especially the GEO, the Group of Earth Observation, will provide quantified guidance towards the emission reduction strategy and tracking changes in the nature carbon cycle caused by the human activity and the climate variability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, China. I just remind you that if you want to intervene, you put your flag up. Waving your hand won't work. Huh? But I turn now to the European Commission, and because it's a colleague, I can remind him to speak briefly, because we've got quite a long list of speakers now, and we need to fit as many as we can in. So, Gilles, please.
I do my best, Patrick. First of all, I would like to thank the speaker from the Cook Island for his very interesting presentation. Second, I would like to start with saying that the European Union is deeply engaged in supporting a global effort in the domain of climate change, to cope with climate change. And of course, it is for the benefit of Europe, but we believe that this engagement is also for the benefit of the world. So what are our overall expectations from GEO? Well, first of all, I think very simply, GEO, we should continue the effort so that GEO collect, make available and upscale Earth observation climate knowledge already existing in GEO member organization. With that, we believe that we can support the EU engagement regarding environmental sustainability and adapting to climate change. So we think it's a very important role for GEO to accumulate this knowledge and make it available. By the way, the good news is that those engagements are reflected in the priorities of the new governance of the European Union with the new Commission President-elect Ursula von der Leyen. In practical terms, it should allow the EU member states and other countries to track progress in the Paris Agreement goals, which is of interest for the planet. Now, what should be the GEO approach to achieve this goal? We believe that GEO should accelerate its effort to ensure an increased recognition of the value of Earth observation in the Ipcc and in UNFCCC. In particular, producing GEO information document that would address specific needs of Ipcc and UNFCCC. I know that there is already an effort which is taking place, but we should do much better in this domain, and in particular to take advantage of the special reports that have been delivered recently by Ipcc, for instance, for land, ocean, and cryosphere. GEO should be prepared to support countries in meeting their national determined contributions, not doing the work what the countries should do, but support the countries with technologies, with information. We, of course, on a very practical side, we would encourage GEO, and we as members of GEO, to be in side event and exhibition at UNFCCC, at COP, and in SEPSTA meetings. In this context, I'm pleased to let you know that we most likely will be present at the COP25 event now due to take place in Madrid. We support an in-depth assessment of the relevant GEO work program activities so that we can make more visible those resources. And something very important, we think that the GEO work program should be drafted including key stakeholders, so meaning going out of the box, because for the time being, we are drafting those work programs in a closed circle, but we need maybe the Cook Island to be part of this activity. So we should probably focus on GEO action around the use of Earth observation for impact assessment and adaptation. And finally, because I have the message from the chair, I think we should support GEO members so that they can approach their national delegates, experts in UNFCCC and Ipcc, to promote the GEO added value role. And in this context, it probably would be very useful to prepare a standard briefing that could be used by GEO members to contact their national counterpart in Ipcc and UNFCCC. And with this, thank you very much for the time you have been given to me.
Well, thank you for your efforts to be brief. I now move to Greece, who I'm sure will show you how it can be done.
Okay, thank you. So, really touched and inspired by the great words that were given by our friends from the Cook Islands. So we like to highlight that it is our duty as a GEO community to do all that it is possible to ensure that we pass a better and safer planet and environment to the next generation, who are increasingly mobilized and tasked for immediate climate action, at the same time warning us that they will be watching on us. So one great way as a community to build upon this momentum is to demonstrate that we have great respect for our world's cultural heritage, for which Greece is especially sensitive. And I would like to inform you that in this direction, Greece has undertaken an initiative to propose an action to the United Nations Climate Action Summit back in September of this year to protect natural and cultural monuments that are threatened by anthropogenic climate change. The proposal has been supported by WMO and UNESCO, and it has been presented in New York by the Prime Minister of Greece. And the Greek proposal has already been included in a group of emblematic proposals of interest to the UN. So having said that, we strongly believe that the Greek proposal provides an excellent opportunity to the global observing system of systems and our own GEO, especially now that the regional GEOs have been put in force, to be pioneers of this important issue, allowing for us to work together on common activities, co-design, as Gilles would say, from scratch, traversing all three GEO priorities and targeting the use of GEO for the monitoring and preservation of our planet's cultural heritage, both natural and man-made. So we wholeheartedly anticipate that such a proposal would strengthen the cohesion within GEO and create unique opportunities for collaboration between the regional GEOs with a focus on protecting our past in order to create a better future for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I move now to France, please.
Thank you, Chair. France thanks GEO for this ambitious and relevant document and for the message of the speaker. we share. Indeed, the diagnosis from science is very clear. We are not on the right track to achieve the temperature target set by the Paris Agreement. The climate marches around the world, led by active youth, remind us of our responsibilities towards future generations. We need to define concrete and integrated responses from global to local to fight climate change based on the best available scientific knowledge. That is why the European Union launched the Copernicus Climate Change Service as an operational service in June 2018, and why the Space Climate Observatory was launched by President Macron in June 2019 by 26 space agencies and organizations. The Space Climate Observatory is aiming at studying and monitoring the impacts of climate change, especially at local scales, using satellite-based Earth observation tools, in combination with field data and models. In this way, it will complement and extend existing initiatives, boosting them at national and local scales. So, in the framework of best approaches of the use of Earth observation in support of member actions on climate change, the Space Climate Observatory could therefore be included in the list of opportunities to be supported in Chapter 4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I move now to Japan, and then I have the UK, and then I'm going to close the list and make a few points from the Slido inputs. But Japan, please. Yeah, go for it. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. As Chinese delegation mentioned, Japan considers that the Ipcc 2019 refinement was a great step forward for the GEO community. That includes the role of satellite observation data, including that of GOSA-2 of Japan, is now recognized as one of the valid references to measure the global greenhouse gas emissions. We are grateful to the effort by the GEO community for integrating the Earth observation to the Ipcc guidelines. At the same time, it is up to our future effort whether we will be able to truly integrate the satellite Earth observation data into the methodology to measure and assess the global greenhouse gas emissions. We believe that each of us in the GEO community need to keep on working in this area, including the response to the first global stocktake in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The UK, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much to the speakers and to the other interventions made by colleagues, all very supportive of this work. I'd just like to inform the meeting that the UK plan to host a side event alongside COP25 later this year, based on climate change and the role of EO and the role of Earth observation that can support our efforts in climate change. The event will cover 4 main themes. They are measuring ice from space, oceans, and using Earth observations to measure marine climate variables, including ocean acidification, natural hazards, and climate change and the relationship between those and what Earth observation can do to help. And finally, and importantly, and noting that this has also come up on the Slido, work on nature-based solutions and how Earth observation can support work not only in measuring climate change, but also looking to mitigate against the impacts of climate change using natural solutions. So I hope delegates here and those who will be involved in COP25 will support and come along to that event. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ian. And I think that makes a good transition perhaps to our second speaker, and David Omen, who's going to, as I said at the beginning, present us a bit the perspective from the UNFCCC, and in particular, how can we make Earth observation and the work of GEO specifically more relevant, more useful, and more connected with the global debate on climate change, of which the UNFCCC is obviously at the center. So David, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Patrick. Distinguished delegates, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to speak today on the behalf of the UNFCCC and to be in this discussion here, which is highly relevant for us. And I also want to thank my co-speaker here for reminding us why we need to be like up speed and to be involved in this discussion all together. Unfortunately, it's very hard to follow him in terms of giving a remark here. So high-quality Earth observations are the foundation for solid decision-making on future action on climate change. And the Paris Agreement was specifically mandated based on the best available scientific information. Earth observations provide us with the knowledge to inform action under the Paris Agreement. Observation is pivotal to providing the alerts on global climate or global temperatures related to the 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius temperature limits under the Paris Agreement, as well as other climate indicators to assess progress on the Paris Agreement goals. Under the UNFCCC, the subsidiary body on scientific and technological advice, known as the SABSTA, that also the colleague from the European Commission already mentioned, is basically the place in which the scientific information is brought into the UNFCCC process. And we have particularly the research and systematic observation agenda item. And also events such as the Research Dialogue and Earth Information Day, in which we're taking up and showcasing a lot of the solutions that are helping parties to mitigate and adapt. So we are working closely with a number of international and regional organizations to enable information exchange as a science policy interface, and a number of mandates under the process support this collaboration. The Global Climate Observing System, known as GCOS, officially reports on the state of climate observations to the SABSTA. The GCOS implementation plan provides requirements and recommendations for a fully operational system for the climate, including needs for essential climate variables to support implementation of the Paris Agreement, SDGs, and Sendai Framework. The satellite community, through the Joint Committee on Earth Observation Satellites and Coordination Group for Meteorological Satellite, working group on implementing the architecture for climate monitoring from space, including the constellation architecture for monitoring atmospheric carbon dioxide and methane and their natural and anthropogenic fluxes from space. And the World Meteorological Organization provides the GHG Bulletin and the statement on the state of the global climate on an annual basis to the SABSTA during the COP. The Secretariat has recently strengthened its collaboration with WMO through a memorandum of understanding to better enable support by the observation community for the Paris Agreement for both mitigation and adaptation. And now, what could be the role of GEO? So the Paris Agreement, as you all know, is the main international climate change treaty. And parties have agreed the goals within it to including to limit global warming below 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, or preferably 1.5 degrees, to enhance countries' ability to adapt to climate change and to do so in the context of sustainable development and appropriate provisions of financial and other resources to those most in need. And to those to reach those goals, the Paris Agreement outlines a cycle, and that's the slide you can see on screen right now. It's a very simplified model of what's actually going on with a lot of synthesis reports and so on. So basically what happens is the countries provide a national climate target every 5 years, which are called the national determined contributions, and the current NDCs will be altered or updated in 2020. And these communicated targets are nationally determined, but must be stronger than the previous targets. That's always the rule. And with their NDC, parties will also provide a long-term low GHG emission development plan. So based on that, countries then undertake action to meet the targets identified in their NDCs, with developing countries receiving appropriate support. Starting in 2024 and every subsequent 2 years, countries report on action taken through a transparent reporting process. And starting 2023, there will be a global stocktake to look at collective progress towards the goal. And then the stocktaking recommends the ways to be more ambitious in the next cycle. And following each global stocktake, countries will again take the recommendations and their experiences home and then provide more ambitious targets in the next round. So that's always the cycle that it's supposed to go through, with always more ambitious targets in the NDCs. So GEO has a unique role to play in serving the Paris Agreement. As mentioned, the GECO's essential climate variables provide a basis for decision-making at all levels on action for both mitigation and adaptation, as well as assessing progress. But GEO is also well positioned to support the provision of climate variables, particularly for the terrestrial domain. GEOs should support parties and the broader community in the provision of socio-economic variables. One recommendation is for GEO to develop a set of essential socio-economic variables with the same concept as ECVs and with appropriate quality control in the context of FAIR, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data sharing principles. For example, in their NDCs, parties are responsible for identifying indicators to track progress. How can GEO support parties identify and track indicators, particularly for adaptation? And when it comes to the national adaptation plans, in a recent paper, the Least Developed Countries Expert Group and the Adaptation Committee, which are two constituted bodies under the UNFCCC, identified gaps and needs for countries to integrate science in adaptation planning and implementation, which is, I think, is also very relevant for this discussion. The 4 gaps or needs relevant for this discussion would be the capacity of national, subnational, and sector experts to work effectively with climate data and climate change scenarios in adaptation planning and decision-making, availability and accessibility of climate data and climate change scenarios to underpin effective adaptation planning and implementation, taking into account the specific needs at the national, subnational, and sectoral level, the capacity to develop, analyze, and define baseline, and the capacity to undertake comprehensive risk and vulnerability assessments covering all key sectors and systems at the national, subnational, and sectoral level. So I think that's also something that I've seen in the question very regularly. How can we actually understand the data? I mean, there is a lot of it already out there, but how can it be pooled, presented to the parties of the under the UNFCCC in a way that helps them to make their vulnerability assessments better? And therefore, to track the progress in reduction of vulnerability from NAP implementation, any indicator must have a baseline for adaptation to monitor climate change, be framed in a manner that policymakers understand, be responsive to the physical science, e.g. temperature support planning, be ample and consistent such that trend lines can be established to assess progress, and be aggregable to assess collective progress. So what could be indicators for different sectors, and how will these change over time? How can observations be used to support parties measure and report indicators? How can socioeconomic and other variables fit in here? And can GEO support parties' use of Earth observation information better to provide a baseline for NAPs and NDCs, as well as support implementation and tracking long-term progress? And furthermore, we are moving into a new age of satellite imagery. I mean, Space 4.0 represents a new era for the space sector, characterized by a new playing field. The era is unfolding through interaction between governments, private sector, society, and politics. Information from satellites will be fully integrated with other observations and data, and it will be processed using big data analytics and AI to produce real-time, high-resolution, relevant information for society to provide collaborative, data-driven, and transformational risk-informed decision-making tools for policy and investment, while also monitoring ambition progress. So how can GEO mobilize this information to support the Paris Agreement and at the same time enable global well-being, sustainability, and equity? I look forward to learning about good practices and initiatives that are being incubated and can contribute towards this vision. So closing this intervention, the GEO community has a unique role to play in supporting the Paris Agreement implementation at global, regional, and national level. And I encourage those of you here today to reach out to support this important work and find opportunities to bring the open data, knowledge, and services needed to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we look forward to building further collaboration. I wish you a successful conference, and before I close, I was asked to just reiterate, I think some colleagues already said that the COP this year, to which we would all like to invite you once again, has been moved to Madrid, but still it's still at the same dates. It will still be the same presidency, and thanks to a generous offer by the government of the Kingdom of Spain, they are providing logistical support. Yeah, and when I heard about the side events that are planned, so we are taking all efforts in order to minimize the impact on side event and exhibitions that were planned in conjunction with COP25. Would ask everyone who is interested in more information to look at the website where there's a briefing, and we'll make all information, which is also very new to us because this has been a development since last week, Thursday, I think. So we'll make that information available to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
David, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for that very rich and I think very practical presentation of the work of the UNFCCC and how the many ways that Earth observation and the work of GEO more specifically can contribute to the global responses to climate change. In the few minutes that we have remaining, I firstly would like to maybe pull out a few of the thoughts, themes that have come through the Slido questions, and I interpret the questions as sort of implied comments and sort of messages on where we should be concentrating in particular. And the three things that perhaps stand out most are firstly the Arctic, and you know, whether we can do more through our geo-monitoring systems to track impacts of climate change in the Arctic. Secondly, you know, whether we can use Earth observation systems and GEO to help with the necessary transition, in particular of energy-intensive industries. And thirdly, a more general sort of remark, comment that we should have a particular focus on adaptation. I think it's one of your points as well, David, in thinking about how we can make better use of data, knowledge, and systems. So I now have a couple of final speakers, and then we will try, with the help of the Secretariat, to sort of tease out a few preliminary conclusions. But I'd like to hand over to SDSN, one of our participating organizations, for a quick comment.
Thank you. I would just like to address the issue of coordination between GEO and the Ipcc. Ipcc has recently reconstituted the task group on data. I'm an ex officio member. That group is meeting starting today in Montreal, Canada, and will be addressing key issues related to data from the Ipcc assessments. So I just recommend that the secretariats initiate a discussion about coordination. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And one of the great pieces of news of the last 12 months has been that the Secretariat has managed to negotiate observer status for GEO in the Ipcc, and I congratulate Gilberto and the team on doing that, which should help us indeed make progress in that important way. So finally, Australia.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Steve Hatfield-Dodds from the Department of Agriculture to briefly comment on the importance of Earth observation in helping agriculture and food security to deal with a changing climate. So, Steve.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I'll be as quick as I can. For context here, I note that most estimates of the near-term climate impacts suggest that around half those impacts or more will occur through agriculture and food supply, and that's very much my day job is helping those industries. So So 3 short propositions. First, Earth observations are crucial to understanding and properly managing natural resources, including for agricultural production. Here in Australia, agriculture accounts for around 3% of economic activity by value, and more than 70% of that production is exported. So we're quite keen on competitive and productive agriculture. We do that in the context of one of the world's most variable climates, and our agricultural practices are already strongly adapted to managing climate variability. So notwithstanding that adaptation and centuries of history, adverse shifts in climate and seasonal conditions around 2 decades ago have already materially reduced agricultural trend productivity growth in Australia. We're only able to know that through the use of Earth observations. Research by my agency, the Australian Government Agricultural Research Bureau, looking at the impacts of variability and change, linked decades of farm survey, admin survey data to Bureau of Meteorology and weather data, and then applied advanced machine learning to untangle a very complex system of cause and effect. We isolated climate from all other factors that influence agricultural productivity, and what we found was essentially the shift in climate conditions entirely explained a complete pause in agricultural productivity growth for a decade from 1995. It's the first time in recorded history of agriculture in Australia since white settlement that agricultural productivity has paused in that way, so this is a pretty big deal. We also found that from around 2005-2006, cropping farms adapted to those changes and trend growth resumed, but it resumed at about 75% or 80% of the previous trend. So adaptation so far hasn't managed to do that. We couldn't understand the system we live in without Earth observations. The second proposition, still being quick, is that obviously Earth observation remote sensing capabilities are improving rapidly, and this offers all sorts of improved decision support. I won't list all my examples for time, but I'll just note there's 3 types of categories that you can think of here. There's on-farm decision support, which is really valuable. There's off-farm or wider decision support, such as understanding the pattern of biosecurity spread through understanding plantation density in vineyards and bananas, for example. And also it helps with compliance and trust in the system. And we've seen some recent and perhaps controversial examples with that. We're tracking water flows in Australia in a time of drought when water is arguably more important than blood or whiskey. And the third point that I want to make to this community is that while agricultural researchers appreciate the benefits of improved real-time information and decision support, the step changes, the major gains are going to occur when Earth observations are combined with information and data from other sources to deepen our understanding of the system, the complex natural systems we live in, and the social and economic systems that are intertwined with them. And 4 quick examples is, it would be a game changer in Australia to have reliable regional long-term weather forecasts. Would make all the difference if we could plan a year and a half ahead. For farmers struggling with drought, improved parametric insurance would be fabulous and enable them to manage risks that they can't currently manage. Proper quantification and assessment of a wide range of ecosystem services would be a great value to public and private decision makers, including through the design and implementation of improved policy programs. This would include the management of environment and water. And last, improved evidence-based understanding the impacts of climate variability and change and how these might be managed or mitigated is central to the future of agriculture and around the world and associated food systems. Taking that evidence base and then putting it into public models and forecasts and scenarios of climate change and impacts under different emissions trajectories is crucial to understanding the relative merits of different pathways and motivating sensible global action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure I speak for many in the room in expressing our collective solidarity with the communities affected by the terrible droughts that are in your country at the moment. We've come to the end of our time, and I would have liked to spend a little time going through the the sort of wisdom that the Secretariat have miraculously distilled from our discussions, but I hope you've had an opportunity to see the main points here, and I won't go through them in detail. What I take away from this discussion, beyond these very important and rather practical suggestions, is that there is a really strong interest and mobilization in the GEO community to become more directly involved and more directly relevant in the debate on climate change, and that here are some of the ways that we can think about to take that forward. We will have a chance to digest these main outcomes, and they'll be part of the overall summing up of the plenary tomorrow, so if people do want to come back, that there will be a chance for further sort of inputs. But I found this an extremely rich and encouraging discussion. Climate change and Earth observation, a key priority, I think, for GEO and for many of us here. I want to thank our speakers for their inspiring contributions, so to Mr. Puna and Mr. Oem. And I'd like to thank Steve and the colleagues from the Secretariat for keeping us more or less on the straight and narrow. So if we can just applaud ourselves for such a useful discussion. In drawing this session to a close, I'm sure that you all remember the choreography that Stuart announced earlier for lunch. That is, starting upstairs, serving first, and then downstairs afterwards. But I think, Stuart, you wanted another announcement.
And can we say thank you to Patrick as well, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of minor administrative announcements. The first one, and I'm going to hold these up. You each got a coffee cup, a reusable coffee cup, and a reusable water bottle at your table. Now, we've noted that a lot of people have gone and used their coffee cup and then left them behind for the staff to clean up, which was not the idea. The idea is that you hold on to your coffee cup and you reuse it. However, the coffee cups that have been left out in the system, we are getting washed and will be put out on a table. So if you have left your coffee cup outside, please collect it once it's washed and reuse it. We're trying to save resources here, not give you glass coffee cups that are single use. So please make use of those appropriately. Second, yes, the lunch, as we mentioned before, will start being served upstairs. It will then be progressively served downstairs. Please take the time to check out the stands at the exhibition and talk to exhibitors. This is really a key opportunity to mix between the industry track and the GEO plenary audience. So make sure you strike up some conversations, explore, check out the virtual reality display. And lastly, this may be standing room only, but at lunchtime there is also a European Commission Pacific lunchbox session in the Pacific room, which I encourage those of you interested in hearing about Copernicus in the Pacific to go along to. Thank you.
And please come back for 2 p.m. for session 3, action on disaster risk reduction. Enjoy your lunch.